Welcome to another segment of provocative conversations destined to provoke further thought and spark greater questions regarding God, church, and the religious establishments of both the past and the present. I am the proud heretic, Mr. Provocateur himself. Hello, you know who I am. We are continuing with the divine season of the pandemic, specifically the prophetic utterances that God spoke to me in relation to the church. Again, I am pulling from messages or words that God spoke to me that I heard throughout the past, from the month of March all the way up until the month of September. There are some things that God spoke to me in the month of October. However, I don't know if I'll just speak on that stuff briefly at the end of all of my recordings or what, but I am pulling from 22 different messages that God spoke to me. Okay, understand this here. I am not oblivious to the fact that not only are the messages that I speak on are controversial, but the messages that I speak or the words that I use are definitely peeing certain people off. I know that I pee people off in the wording that I use. I don't necessarily mean to be vulgar, if you want to call it that, but I want to be raw at points and times. It's to make points. It's to deal with the charm and tissue mentality of the religious mind. At other times to express a thing. Understand that I don't apologize, but I do apologize, but I don't apologize. So just because I say I do apologize, don't think that I'm going to stop doing what I do, how I do, what I do. If it's too hard for you to appreciate or accept, then all I can say to you is you're probably listening to the wrong person. Go and see if you can find the raw truth that would be void of all that you don't like in my methods, my method of approach. There's someone out there. If that's what you feel, it is what it is. I'm only speaking to those who you know that it's for you to hear through me. I'm only speaking to those who feel that there is a definite conviction on your part by God that you are to hear what I'm saying, or should I say that it's all right for you to hear what I'm saying, that you're not sinning or going down some rabbit hole of deception or falsity that's going to lead you astray and cause you to be one of those fallen away ones that the Bible seems to be talking about. Whatever it is, just know that I'm not trying to offend you necessarily, for especially those who are not, or should I say those who are convicted and convinced that they are to hear what God has said through me. Let's keep moving. God said to me, I'm still in June, on June the 3rd, 2020, which was a very deep and in-depth conversation that God had with me. I say one-way conversation that God had with me. God said to me, notice that the doors of the church have been ordered to be closed to its congregants. Notice that the doors of the church have been ordered by the government, by the states, to be closed to its congregants. He says, notice how the doors that lead into the walls of the church, notice how they have been closed. They have been ordered to be shut from public gatherings. We know by now that churches, especially since they've been complaining like little whinies, how the church doors have been closed in our different communities, our different states, and public gatherings in those church buildings have been banned, or should I say ordered to not occur, only for the safety and the welfare of those within. However, we know the church, they're whiny pools, so they're whining about, we didn't get our way, we don't get to go in our sandbox and play with each other, we don't get to go in there and play with our blocks together. God says, the walls of the church are the beliefs of the church. God says the walls of the church are the beliefs of the church. Do you know that your beliefs, they create spiritual walls? Notice how the physical church has physical walls, and the physical walls of a church are erected based upon individuals who have beliefs. And in those beliefs, they build churches. They build walls. God says the physical walls of the church represent the spiritual beliefs that the church holds. He says the doors of the church speak to the hearts of the people. The doors of the church speaks of the hearts of the people. Just like you have physical doors on a church building, he said the doors that are found upon the structure of church or the church or a church, those doors in the opening of the church or the entryway, doors are entryways into. He said the doors of the church speak to the hearts of the people. So now you have walls, you have beliefs, and you have doors. The walls represent the beliefs. The beliefs are what church buildings or what the church holds dear to them, their beliefs. And their beliefs are the very things that create spiritual walls within the church. The doors of the church, every church has doors by which you enter. The doors of the church, they speak of the hearts of the people. God says the doors of the church speak to the open access to people's hearts. When people go into a church house, for the most part, many people go in there hurting. Their heart has been wounded. Their heart is somewhat open. And if it isn't open, as the preacher does what he does and the church do what the church does, that person's heart eventually opens. He says the doors of the church speaks to the open access of the people's heart. He says the walls of the church are the people's beliefs. The doors of the church speaks to the open access into people's hearts. And then remember, God closed the doors of the church. God is closing the hearts of the people. Not because the people are becoming hardened to God, but rather the people are becoming hardened or closed away from the church. Remember, it's the doors of the church that have been closed by God. So the doors of the church represent the open access or the doorway into a person's heart. If God closed the physical doors, it's apparent that God has closed the spiritual doors to people's heart, by which the church uses that entryway to get into there and build walls of their own beliefs within these individuals. God says the beliefs of the church will no longer be the beliefs of the people. Well, no wonder he closed their hearts. No wonder he closed the doors, because the beliefs of the church will no longer be the beliefs of the people. How the church believes and what the church believes will no longer be what the people believes. Now, don't get it twisted and wrong. Sure, there's going to be those within the church and whatever who are the exceptions, and they will believe what they want to believe and whatever else, because there are verses that says, for they being willingly ignorant. There's another verse in Romans chapter 1, starting at verse 19. It talks about the reprobated mind, where the things that could have been known, or that were and are known by them of God, they choose not to acknowledge, not to accept. So then they become reprobated. So you're going to have those. But anyway, let's keep moving. The beliefs of the church will no longer be the beliefs of the people. He says the hearts of the people are being closed to the beliefs of the church. Wow. He says the hearts of the people will no longer be open to the beliefs that the church holds. Ooh. He says the doors of the church are closing to manifest spiritual implication and application. The doors of the church being closed is a manifestation of spiritual implication. It has spiritual implication. It has spiritual application. He says the implication is that the church will no longer have, it implies that the church will no longer have the same access into the people's hearts as they once did. For the hearts of the people are being secured. I am securing the hearts of the people through the closing of the church's doors. Now, let me say this here. For years and years, probably since 2000, 2001, I began to realize just within myself and within my observation and my studies, all of that put together, God used all of that to bring me into something, which was, I was wondering, why can't churches win these younger generational individuals? Why is the church not necessarily growing? Why is the church only receiving those who have already been in the church world forever and a day, been to multiple churches, so all they do is they just circulate throughout church to church to church to church. If this one is hot, then they go to that one. If that one is hot, then they go to that one. They just keep moving and moving and moving. So you're not really getting new people from the so-called world of things, but you're just getting church folk who came from other church folk, who came from other church folk, who came from other church folk. And I'm like, why isn't it that the church is not pulling in new generations outside of the kids of former generations? That it didn't make sense to me. And then the church began to lose even them. And then here I am raising kids now, and I don't have the conviction to flood my kids' minds with Bible verses, to force them to sit down and read Bible verses with me. I no longer have the conviction to bring them into the church house. In fact, I had the conviction to keep them from the poison of the church house, not knowing that God was actually using all of this, or God was the one actually, is the one actually behind all of this. And I started saying, well, it's apparent that God is preserving a generation, a people. And then in February, he did mention that to me, February of this year, 2020, though I'm in October right now, October the 18th. But God showed me that he was saving a remnant, a people, a generation for himself. That this generation would not be tainted by churchology, religion, religiosity, traditionalism. God was showing me that there is a people that will not bow to Baal, the God of old. There are a children, there is a people who will not be sacrificed on the altars of Molech. In the Old Testament, Molech was the god of Molech. The children, the parents, the Hebrew or Jewish, whatever you want to call them, the children, so-called children of Israel, the children of God, the parents were sacrificing their children on the altar of Molech. They were sacrificing their children to the gods of this world. However you want to see that, those of you who want to be theologically exact, it is what it is. You really don't know the whole of what that meant either, if indeed it meant anything, though I do see where it has implication, and it can definitely be applied in this day and age. There is a metaphoric truth in all of that. The beliefs of the church, God said, will no longer be the beliefs of the people. The hearts of the people are being closed to the beliefs of the church. The hearts of the people will no longer be open to the beliefs that the church holds. God says the doors of the church are closing to manifest spiritual implication and application. He says the implication is that the church will no longer have the same access into the people's hearts, for the hearts of the people are being secured. I am securing the hearts of the people through the closing of the church's doors. Oh. And the only person who is mad is that no thing devil, because there is none. But you know, they say ain't nobody mad but the devil in you, the devil and the church, the devil in the church, the devil as the church. The doors of the church are being applied to the hearts of the people. The doors of the church are being applied to the hearts of the people. The application of the doors closing, the spiritual application of it is the hearts of the people. The doors of the church being closed, the hearts of the people being closed. God says the doors of the church represent the closing of a dispensation. Wow. The doors of the church and the closing of the church doors represent the closing of a dispensation. A dispensation is a period in time, a certain time period by which something happens, by which something goes on, by which something is practiced. But when that time period, that allotted time period has done its time, has served its purpose, then that thing is dispensed of. God says the doors of the church represent a dispensing of. A dispensing of that which was once practiced for a period, or doing an allotted, or doing a specific amount or a specific period of time in time. He says the doors of the church represent the closing of a dispensation. The doors of the church represent the closing of a dispensation. The children of Israel leaving out of Egypt was representing the closing of a dispensation. The children of Israel moving out of the wilderness 40 years later represented a period, a dispensation of time, or a dispensational period of time in time. Jesus represented the closing of the doors of the law, moving the world, the church, not the church, but moving things into the period of grace, the dispensational period of grace, if you want to say it like that. If you really want to learn more about dispensations, look at my podcast. And like somewhere in the 80s, I had podcast, not in 1980s, but my podcast, somewhere near 80, 81, it starts a series of teaching called Dispensational Relationships. You really need to hear that. Some of you, many of you, that was something that I just got on the mic and began to talk about as I was going through some things personally. That teaching will help many of you. Just listen to it. It's good. It's good to get into you. Those of you who feel that it is for you to listen to. I'm not trying to reach everybody, because I know everybody doesn't want to be reached, especially the church. So it is what it is. But for those who are to be reached through me, listen, God told me you're out there. I'm coming for you. That's who I'm coming for. And I don't even know who you are, but I'm coming for you. The doors of the church represent a dispensational era. So when those doors were open, we were in an era of the church, or in the era, E-R-A. We could say we were in the E-R-R-O-R of the church, but we'll say what God told me right here, the era, E-R-A, of the church. So when the church doors were open before the pandemic, it represented the fact that we were in the era of the church. Now that the church doors are closed and closing, it speaks of the fact that now we are closing out of that dispensational era. God has closed the church doors, the church era, E-R-A. And most likely, he's also closed out the E-R-R-O-R-S, the errors of the church by the church. God says the church being ordered to close its doors represent a dispensational ending of the era of the church. It is the scariest thing and the most vile thing for someone such as myself to come on who uses the word ass at times, damn at times, hell at times, to turn around and say, number one, God spoke to me. Only religious fanatics get choked up over that. You're just so religiously zealoted that you can't even imagine the magnitude of his grace, the magnitude of his understanding about his own creation, humanity, and the fact that he's not mad or angry at any of us. Only you are. It pees off the church to hear someone, especially me, an ordained heretic, to say the era of the church has seen its days. That the era of the church, that dispensational period in time, has come to its close. But God says the era of the church has seen its days. The era of the church has run its course. The era of the church has served its purpose. We have such a problem when God finally ends a thing, because it's like, why did you end that? Why, the children of Israel, why did you end our time in Egypt? Well, silly, number one, it says you all cried out for 400 years about it, Moses, why did you bring us out here into this desert? God, why did you pull us off of the Egyptian foods and started feeding us manna? Moses, why did you all take us out of Egypt and leave our gods in Egypt? Now we got to melt down gold and silver and precious jewels to build a God out here through Aaron in the wilderness. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, why did you come here, Jesus, and disturb what we had going on with the law? It's just, why did you have to bring the era of grace in? What was wrong with the law? We're never satisfied, especially the church. We hate when something comes to an end, when a good thing comes to an end. They say all good things must come to an end. Well, God says the era of the church has seen its days. The era of the church has run its course. The era of the church has served its purpose. In all of its twistedness, the church was still ordained to be such in the season that it was ordained to be such. Doesn't make it right, the people's motives and intents, but God had something working in that above and beyond the motives and intents of the people. The era of the church has served its purpose. We need to understand when the church has served its purpose, or when a thing has served its purpose, and then we let that thing go. It's just like a family member who's however years old. If he or she has served their purpose, we need to learn to just let them go. Some marriages have served their purpose, and those marriages now need to end. Well, God don't like divorce. Only because your book said so. God don't like divorces. No? Okay. Anyway, listen. All marriages are not put together to stay together forever. I know that's hard. Listen, families are not put together to stay together forever. Your children aren't put together to stay together forever with you or whatever else. We know these things to be true just by the fact that death is ordained for each of us. If we were meant to be put together forever in the sense of forever on this side of things, and that dispensational period of them being on this earth realm is not supposed to come to an end, and why is death assigned to each of us? Duh. Anyway, the era of the church is coming to its close, he says. You are seeing the last scene of the church's era. God says you are seeing the last, SCENE, the last scene of the church's era. That's what is happening in this pandemic season of 2020. We are seeing the last scene of the church's era. And I believe that the church is sensing it, and they're sensing their loss of influence. They're sensing that we're getting ready to be persecuted. They're sensing these things, but they're sensing them with wrong thoughts. They're sensing it as we're being modern day martyrs. But when they were killing everybody else around the world, and as they're still killing everybody else around the world, those who don't think like them or believe like them or behave like them or believe what they believe and worship how they believe and go through the doors that they claim. They never included any of those people inside of being martyrs who had to take all that they've been given for all of these thousands of years. Church, you are a sick entity and you must come to an end, period. Let me keep going. There are some things that I want to say in regards to that as it relates to the president and the church, and how the church is fighting for their supremacy, fighting for their superiority, fighting for their peace, their political peace in Donald Trump. But I'll hold off on that. I don't feel like going down that route right this second. I may pull into it, but I don't feel like it right now. Okay, God says the physical church, the physical closure of the church is only an outward manifestation of an inward truth. God says the physical closing of the church is only an outward manifestation of an inward truth. The inward truth of the matter is that the church itself is closing. The physical closing of the church is just an outward manifestation of what is happening spiritually or inwardly. God says for centuries, the church has been infected. infected, infected. He says the church has become a place of systemic infection. The infection of the church is inherently passed on within the fibers, the being of human beings. The church for centuries has been infected. This is not a new infection on the part of the church, but it is the very same infection that the church has always had. The church has become a place of systemic infection. The infection is inherently built into the system of the church and is now known for its power to infect. God says the church is known for its power to infect. People are known for their infectious influence. Well, the church is known for its infectious influence. God says the only potency that most churches have is their ability to infect. Their ability to infect others with their own traditional doctrinal beliefs. The church is a place of traditional doctrinal belief infections. The church continues to infect the communities that it resides in, those who come into the house doors of the church. People are being infected by the traditional doctrinal beliefs of those within the church. Jesus said it like this, and I was really dogged out by a ministry in Germany for standing up and having the galls to say the things that I said regarding the church. And it was a Church of God in Christ ministry. Some of those people are still out here in this world, and some are more than likely gonna listen to me or listening to me, and it is what it is. This was back in the early 90s or the mid 90s. And I got up one night on a Friday night. I even remember the night well. In fact, I have the video of it. I had a person that I knew who was in ministry as well, who came and recorded the message. Video recorded it. An American who came over and recorded it. It was on a military base, but there was an American guy who was married to a German, and he lived off post. He was no longer in the military. He had been out for 20 something years at that time. He just never came back to the United States, but he came and recorded that message for me. Actually, I didn't have him to record it. He just recorded it, and I didn't even know he did. And he came to me and gave me a copy of it. I don't know, a couple of days later or whatever. I'm not sure. But churches are known for their power to infect others with the religion that they themselves have been infected with. God says churches are known for their power to infect others with the very religion that they themselves have been infected with. He said the church house is no more than a place where people gather to be infected with the infections that are encased within the walls of the church. What are the walls of the church? Remember, the walls of the church are the beliefs of the church. So listen to what he says again. The church house is no more than a place where people gather to be infected by and with the walls of the church, the beliefs of the church. The church is nothing but a local place where people go into to be infected with the traditional doctrinal beliefs of that particular church house, of those particular members within that particular church house. Again, I spoke a message in 1994, and the message was, stop nullifying the power of God through your traditions. In other words, Jesus has a verse, or there's a verse where Jesus supposedly spoke, and it stated, they nullify the power of God through their traditions. You nullify, you make void the power of God by way of your traditions. Your traditions won't allow the power of God to penetrate, if you want to say it like that. That's why you will hear me make mention, or you will hear me say, to hell with religion, Christianity, church, and the traditions of the church that void out the truth and nullify the actual power of God from ever being effective within those institutions and through those institutions. God says churches are known for their power to infect others with the religion that they themselves have been infected with. He said the church house is no more than a place where people gather to be infected with the infections that are encased within the walls of the church itself. He says the church has also become a place, or the church has become a place of systemic infection. In other words, religious infection, traditional doctrinal infection is systemically or inherently interwoven into the system of the church. So when you go into the church, when you go into the systems of the church, you just expect, or you ought to just expect, that systemically you will come out infected. God says for centuries the church has been infesting. Let me go back and say this here on this one, because the word that God used here is, there are two words that he used. One, infect, and another one, infest. So let's read that with the word infest. He says the church has also become a place of systemic or systematic infestation. To infest, or to spread, or to accumulate, or to duplicate. He says the church is a place where the traditional doctrinal beliefs are systematically duplicated. To infest with something is to cause there to be a multiplication, or just think of roaches, an infestation of roaches, where they take over. That the church has a takeover spirit too. Yes, they do. But infestation, to infest a thing, it speaks of rodents, roaches, rats, varmints, snakes, an infestation of. God says the church is that type place. It's a place of systematic infestation. Notice how the church attempts to take over the world. They feel they got to take over the world. They feel that they got to conquer everything and everybody wherever they go. And if we can't make you like us, we'll kill you. We'll disown you. We'll tear you down to be nothing. If we can't make you like us, if we can't come and take over. And for centuries, God says the church has been doing this. He says for centuries, the church has been infesting the communities of this world. Even TBN, the broadcasting network station, Trinity Broadcasting Network station, where their goal is to infect or infest, take over the world, to make duplications throughout the world of itself. And wherever we aren't received, then we'll dog them out and we'll tear them down. We'll even pray that God destroys that nation, or brings everything down in that nation until that nation becomes like us, as though God is listening to that. For centuries, the church has been infesting the communities of this world, God says. He says the church is now known for its societal infestation, by which church houses have populated themselves throughout every community in our societies. And the churches have. He said the church is known for its societal infestation. You know the church to be of a societal type infestation. Why? Because you know that you've talked about how many churches we got in one city, on one street, in one town. Why in the hell is we got 12 churches and there ain't but 9 people in the town? How do you do that? Does 3 go to 2 churches? How does that work? Or we go to this church house today and then we all go to that church house tomorrow, and then the next day the church is known for its societal infestation, by which church houses have populated themselves throughout every community within our different societies. God says churches are of every race, creed, and belief, and are located throughout all the different communities of this world. We know that to be so. Well, that's a church takeover. That's a church infestation. Even though for centuries the church has been both infected and infecting. Okay, even though for centuries the church has been both infected and infecting others, the church has continued to remain in effect without the ability to affect. God says, even though the church for centuries has known to be a carrier of infection and has indeed been infecting others, he says, still the church has continued to remain in effect, even though it doesn't even have the ability to affect. The church has no ability to affect, no ability to bring change in the social communities that it resides in. Yet the church is still in effect, even though it doesn't have the ability to affect. He says the church has been able to infect, but not affect. The church has been good at infecting people with its traditional doctrinal beliefs, but it's been terrible in the area of affecting the people. He says the church has taken over the communities of this world without any ability to properly affect, to properly influence, not in a good manner. The church has lost or does not have that ability to be effective or to affect those that are right there around it, right there in the midst of it. The church just doesn't have that influence any longer. Without the ability to affect the ills of our society, there is no social relevancy or need for the church within our societies. If the church as an entity, as a system, if it does not have the ability to affect or to impact the ills of society, then there's no societal relevancy or need for the church within our society or within our societies around the world. There's no need for the church if it can't bring forth change in the society that it resides in without having a purposeful impact upon its societies. The church loses its relevance within society. If you don't have a purposeful effect as a church, the ability to affect, but only the ability to infect, then your relevancy within society is lost. The church no longer has credibility. Church, the streets are talking, and the streets are speaking regarding your irrelevance, your inability to bring influence or change. God says the relevancy of the church is based upon its impact upon society, based upon its ability to impact those within society. He says, being void of the ability to properly influence those within society, the church has lost its place of relevancy throughout society. He says, due to the coronavirus, the church house has now become a place of natural infection. Now check that out now. We're going somewhere. We're going somewhere here. Listen. Due to the coronavirus, the church house has now become a place of natural infection. Now, if you go into the church house, it's already widely known that you're probably going to come out infected. And I know some of you folk are still sillified and still going in the church house, and some of you preachers, I tell you what God said about you preachers doing that there. But you're going in the church house and you're saying, well, I'm not infected and the hand of God is on me and God don't let nothing. And I quote Psalms 91 and the 23rd of Psalms, and I quote all this other stuff, and no weapon formed against me, Behold, I give you the power to tread upon serpents, upon all. Still, you're rebellious as hell, and you don't even realize you're rebelling against the order and the new dispensational period in time that God has you in. So you're running back into the church house like blind bats. I'm going ahead of myself. God's going to talk to us about that there a little further down the road on that. I won't get too deep into that right now. That's a good area within this topic. You'll hear me talk about that, the blind bats and all of that. We'll get there. Let's pace ourselves. Due to the coronavirus, the church house has now become a place of natural infection. And we all should know that by now if you pay any attention to the news. But for centuries, and stop thinking that all news is fake news. That's the illusion. And now even the church is telling you that it's all fake. They're saying the church is saying Black Lives Matter is fake. The church is saying all of that stuff is coming from communism, Russian communism. Don't let them do it to you, people. But for centuries, the church house has been a place of spiritual infection. God says. He says the church house has become nothing more than a place for infected people to gather in the hope of infecting even more people. He says the church house has become nothing but a place where infected people go in the hopes of other people coming in or pulling other people in so that they can infect them in the same manner. The Bible says it like this here. Jesus supposedly said it like this here. He said, you cross land and sea to gain one proselyte. And then when you get him into the fold, into your camp, you make him or her twice the sons of hell as yourselves. Wow. The church house is a place where infected people come together to infect those throughout their communities. Not affect, but infect. The infected church is now spreading its infection throughout the world. That's what God said. He says the world is plagued with the church's viruses. Oh, my goodness gracious. The world is plagued with a spiritual pandemic right now. The viruses of the church, that's the spiritual pandemic. The world in the physical sense is plagued with a physical pandemic called the coronavirus. He says, but spiritually, the world is plagued with a spiritual pandemic, the viruses of the church, and it has spread itself throughout the world. That's why it's called pandemic. The church, God says, is a carrier of the viruses that are plaguing the world. The church is the carrier of the spiritual viruses that have infected the communities of this world. See, when you are a carrier of the virus, everywhere you go, you spread the virus. Even though you yourself may now be somewhat immune to the viruses that you are spreading. Your senses no longer respond to where you are spiritually. The church is the carrier of the spiritual viruses that have infected the communities of this world. The church is carrying its viral infections everywhere its members are frequenting throughout the world. The church, through its members, is just running rampant throughout the world, spreading its viruses. The viruses of the church are the beliefs, the traditional doctrinal beliefs of the church, those beliefs that are built in race and racism, built in injustice and inequality. Religion has placed its viral germs upon all systems throughout society through the church. Through the church, religion has been spread. Its viral germs have been spread upon all the systems throughout the world, throughout our society. Religion has bled itself in to the healthcare system, to the economic system, to the political system, to the legal system, to all the systems that are. Religion has spread itself as a viral germ throughout. The church, and you say that's a good thing. No, that's not a good thing. I heard Kenneth Copeland say last night, he stated something to the effect of saying that Democrats think it's a bad thing for Christianity to be pressed throughout the United States and throughout the systems of the United States. And he saw that as being such a bad, evil thing for the Democrats to be. Well, again, Kenneth, I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, and I'm happy that I'm not. I'm not on the crack, and I'm not for the republic that you all stand for. I'm not for any of that. Anyway, if I use that term wrongly, republic, based upon how some of you believed in, I don't necessarily mean it in that sense. Religion has placed its viral germs upon all systems throughout society through the church. The church has spread itself or its germs throughout every sector of society. The world has become infected with the spiritual viruses of religion. And that's why God is closing the church house, so that the church would no longer be able to spread its viral germs throughout the world through its local congregants. The world, God says, is screaming for relief. The world is seeking a cure. We know that the world is screaming for relief from the coronavirus. We know that the world is literally seeking for a cure for the virus, the coronavirus. The world is seeking an antidote for the viruses that are plaguing it. People are seeking for an antidote to combat the ills of their societies. Well, spiritually, the world is screaming for relief, seeking a cure, seeking an antidote. But they don't have any, definitely not from the church. God says, notice how the coronavirus has caused the church to shut its doors. Yes, I have. Notice how the people are being warned about the dangers of attending church settings. Yes, I have. He says, notice how even the world knows how hazardous it is for the overall or to the overall health of those who attend church gatherings within the walls, the belief structures of the church house. Yes, I have noticed that, God, that the world understands how dangerous it is to go within the enclosed walls of the church right now. Spiritually and physically. Notice how it has been proven that enclosed church attendance increases the chances of viral infection. Yes, God, I have noticed that. God says none of this is coincidence. None of this is by coincidence, but rather it is all manifestation of spiritual truth making itself known through medical advice. God says, I'm bringing out physical and spiritual implications to what the medical authorities are telling us. They're telling us, Listen, you don't go into a church setting. You don't go into these enclosed settings and gatherings. Why? Because it is creating issues. It is creating sickness and disease and death. You don't want to go there. It's not by coincidence, God says, that these physical truths that are being expressed by medical scientists and doctors regarding how this thing spreads and what type behavior, what type patterns of behavior, what type gatherings create a hazard to the health of those who are gathering. He says, notice how medical advisors are coming out with this information. He says it's not coincident that there is a spiritual truth in itself in what the medical doctors are saying as well. But what I want to harp there about is we feel that the medical authorities are working with Satan and working against the plans and purposes of God. And that's just all twisted, people. That's carnal thinking, church. That's carnal thinking. Why don't you think spiritually and understand that God is working this thing, that the hand of God is working in this here? We've never been closed before. The church has never been closed. Well, that's the problem. That's what God is fixing. Well, let's see if we can't fix that. And bam, there goes the pandemic. Here comes the pandemic. Now you're saying we don't obey the authorities. Wait a minute, Romans 13, you were telling us constantly. Kenneth Copeland, I heard you read Romans 13 last night to your advantage. Obey the authorities that be. You wouldn't read the first verse of Romans 13. You jump to verses 3 and 4. It says, obey the authorities that be, and they are there in place by God. So if that's the case, then if in this pandemic, the authorities that be, the spiritual authorities that be, would be the scientists and the doctors, because we're in a season of a pandemic and the church does not have an answer for that necessarily. The answer for the church is in the doctors, in the scientists, because those are ones who God used. That doctor is no less anointed, Kenneth Copeland, than you supposedly are in relation to the gospel. His expertise and Dr. Fauci's expertise and the CDC's expertise and the World Health Organization, the WHO, they are no less anointed than you are or are not you. Yet you all feel that the church does not have to listen to the authorities. You were the ones who preached to us and tell us and read to us that we are to obey the authorities that be, and that Jesus did it as well by saying, render unto Caesar what is due to Caesar. Well, why don't you all render unto the doctors, use the principle and render unto the doctors what is due to them? When you all were sitting and playing church, when you all were sitting and robbing people of their life and of their health and of their finances and of their properties and of their own personal freedom, when you church folk were robbing them, these scientists and doctors were figuring out ways regarding upcoming sicknesses and diseases and viruses and pandemics. They were looking for ways, trying to discover ways on how to bring life to the very people you were ripping off in life. And now you get to a pandemic and you righteous, nasty, wretched church calling yourself the body of Christ. You do not represent the body of Christ. You're filthy, you're nasty, you stink, you're hateful, you're disgraceful. Why don't you be quiet, sit down somewhere and listen to the doctors? Stop killing your own members, nuts in authority. You're nuts. I said it, you nuts. And that's doing pretty good, because I could call you jackasses, but I won't, but I might. You guys are silly and sick. Sit down somewhere. Let these people go home. Let them hear from God for themselves. And people, you stop being so blinded. God says some things to me, but I won't go too deep into it right now, but I'm going to go into it maybe in 2 or 3 recordings down for the church. I thought I was going to be through with the church, but I'm not. I have multiple more recordings for this, but you will like it. Some of you won't. But it is what it is. You won't be able to put enough bad words on me, church. It is ordained for me to speak forth as the heretic that I am. It is ordained for me to uncover and unveil and speak out against you. It is ordained. This is the season for it. Remember, the noisy will be silenced. That's you all, the church. And the silent who were silenced or gagged by the church world will now begin to speak out and speak forth. And the people will hear. There's relevancy in what I'm speaking. Listen, none of this God said is by coincidence, but rather it is all manifestation of spiritual truth, making itself known through medical advice. The medical doctors are saying, close the church doors. The virus is spreading. It's rapidly spreading. You're spittering viruses all over. Close the church doors. That's the safe place. People stop gathering in churches. That's a spiritual manifestation of what God is doing to the church world. Church, you want to have eyes to see, but you're blind as bats. You want to have ears to hear, but Helen Keller has 1,000 decibels, whatever, or is that a plus or a negative? Has such a greater decibel of hearing than you all. She operates on such a greater decibel at hearing than you all. And she's deaf or was deaf. Church, you are one blind, deaf bat. Ooh, you don't call the church that. Well, I'll show you where God told me that too. Just hold your horses. Hold your horses. Don't get rid of all your ammunition. Not yet. You're going to need some when I start talking to you about that. But rather, it is all manifestation of a spiritual truth. Listen, the church doors are closed because that's what God is doing. The medical doctors are like that donkey with Balaam, the prophet. The donkey was trying to warn him. The medical officials are trying to warn you all. They are the donkeys of your day, church. But you're too blind to see. So you're kicking at Dr. Fauci and you're kicking at the medical officials because you're dumb like that. You're blind like that. Don't you see that they see the sword of God? They see the angelic sword that Balaam's donkey saw. And they're trying to warn you, silly, why you kicking us? We trying to show you what God is doing. Dummies, stop being dumb. Dumb. Just straight dumb. Tekashi 6ix9ine has a song out right now. Are you stupid, deaf, dumb, or something like that? Are you dumb, stupid, dumb? I like that. I like that. That brother, he's struggling with some things and he's dealing with, life issues and threats and all to his life, and whether he deserves it or not, that's not for me to call. He is. But the boy's got a pretty decent song. Yeah, it's wild. It's got some harsh lyrics to it. But are you dumb, stupid, dumb? Yes. That's what you are, church. Which one? Dumb? Stupid? Dumb? Which one is it? Probably all of the above. The way that you all keep fighting to go back into a burning house. That's about dumb. That's about stupid. And those of you who keep going back in there and being led back in there, open your eyes, people. Ask God to lead you as to what you should be doing. You should know the spiritual atmosphere. You should be able to hear the voice of God, not the voice of your so-called preacher or the voice of your so-called not necessarily prophet, the voice of your bishop, your apostle. If he's leading you into the burning bush, into the burning house, into a house that's being destroyed, why are you following him? Think about that, because we're not through with that by far. But I'm going to move on out of here and get ready for another recording on the next one.